This is Vance Ikezoye, and he is the CEO of Audible Magic. He trained as a bioengineer and has done various positions that he will talk about, including high school teacher for photography and yearbook. As he says, between startups.
Yes.
So, and he's going to talk to us today about his kind of his life trajectory as far as career goes, how he ended up where he is, what he does now in his company, and what his company is responsible for. And at the end, we'll field some questions from the broadcast team. But he's already seen your final match. So.
Good job, you guys.
Yeah, he's very impressed. All right.
Well, thank you. So, if you guys have any questions along the way, please go ahead and ask questions along the way. Otherwise, we'll go through the training called Todd. So, thank you for the time. So, let me give you, just my background. Oh, anybody else?
Oh, it's my family.
Okay.
They wanted to hear it too.
Okay, so let me give you some of my background, partly because it really will help understand how you never know in your own career where you're going to go, and you always make changes along the way because it's just you get different choices along the way. So I grew up in Southern California. I went to Cal, and I was a bioengineer, as it said. And bioengineering, for those of you who might know, is it's really a lot of science and engineering classes. So I took all the biology, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, with the original intent of going to medical school, actually. I took the MCATs and thought that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I'll give you a sign that I want you guys to look out for. So at Cal, I was an engineer, and what I found, you do a lot of projects like you guys are doing at Cal. Multiple people, and you work on something. The thing I realized that I really enjoyed the most was not the coding or the building, but was the presentation afterwards. So I used to be very wanted on project teams because I was like the only person in class that actually liked to present the project at the end. And so that was kind of a signal to me about that I probably should have paid more attention to along the way, and I probably would have gotten my career a little faster. But anyways, that's the first rule I'd like you to kind of think about is think about what you enjoy and what you feel really that you're having fun with, because that's going to give you some indication of what your career should be. So I went to Cal, I graduated in 4 years, and then I decided instead of applying to medical school that I was going to work in bioengineering a little bit. So I worked for Hewlett-Packard in the field as a technical support rep for medical products. So I spent a couple of years in hospitals, working in ORs, working in intensive care units, and ended up learning all about kind of what day-to-day life was in a hospital. And nothing to Dr. Nguyen, but I decided I didn't want to become a doctor. I ended up deciding to go back to business school and get my MBA. And so I went to Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and got my degree in business. I actually went and got accepted as a dual degree Master of Science in Engineering and Master of Business Administration. Once I got there, I decided I wanted no more to do with engineering. So I ended up graduating from graduate school, which is in Pennsylvania, and coming back to the Valley here and working for Hewlett-Packard. And I worked for Hewlett-Packard for another 11 years in the computer business. And there I did marketing, business development. I worked with customers quite a bit, and I worked with engineers quite a bit on developing computer systems. And so I did that for about another 11 years, I said, and I realized that I liked business, but I didn't like big companies. And partly probably because I didn't like working so much for a big organization. I liked a smaller organization. So I left and joined the startup as vice president of marketing. And the company, what we did was, you might know, any shipment that comes into the US, there's import documentation. Well, we collected all that information on every shipment that came into the US by water. And that's about 10,000 shipments a day coming by water. And we developed a product and sold it to people like Pier 1 and Cost Plus, and they used it to source products all over the world. So you could look up rattan furniture, and you can go find out who makes rattan furniture in Indonesia. So we did that. I did that for 5 years. But you can imagine that is a little of a change from computers, and it's a real change from biotechnology. And so the other rule is, I think if you've got a good broad education, especially in the sciences and math and engineering, you can kind of do a lot of different things. You have a lot of flexibility in what kind of careers you have. So anyway, so I go back, I was vice president of this for 5 years. The company did okay, didn't do well, decided it was time for me to make a change, and I took 2 years off. And that's where I taught high school in East Palo Alto for about a year. And originally, when the principal asked me about it, I said, "Do you want me to teach math or computer science or, biology or chemistry?" And he said, "I know you're a photographer. I hope you can teach a photography class." So I taught a photography class. And then the second semester, we decided, because we had a group, we should do the first yearbook for the company. And so that's what we did. So I took this 2 years off, no work. I did volunteer work for the whole 2 years. And then I decided I need to get a real job. And instead of getting a real job, like joining something, I made the very irrational decision to start a company. And so I'm founder of this company called Audible Magic, which I've been doing for about 19 years. So the other lesson is probably one of the things that helps me. Oh, let me back up. When you do startups, startups are very hard. And because what you'll spend your first few years doing is having people tell you why what your idea makes no sense at all and why that can never be a business. And so that's one of the things you're going to get in the beginning is, and that's important to power through, but it's also important to get feedback to say, okay, I need to make some changes to make it something more. And so that's one of the things you learn. But doing startups overall is what I tell people is basically an irrational act. Because if you're going to do something in business, and your goal, for example, might be making a lot of money. Well, startups are not the way to go. Don't do startups for the money, because if I was rational, I would have stayed with HP, and I'd be retired by now. But the reason you go to startups is because you want to take an idea and make it real and see if you can build a business around it. And let me say, it's the most exciting thing you could ever do. It's hard, and the highs are great, and the lows are really low. But if you can accomplish something, it's great. If you fail, you learn something as well. So let me tell you about the company. The company, what we do is we have technology that identifies sound. Are you guys familiar with Shazam?
Yes.
Our technology is like Shazam, but instead of making an app, what we do is we use the technology to work with social video platforms. So our customers are Facebook and Instagram and Twitch. So if any of you have tried to upload a video that contained music on it, or something from a TV show or film, and it got blocked, that's us. We're the bad guys that block this. So what happens is we sell services to Facebook. If a user uploads a video and it contains music, our technology scans it and analyzes it. And then if we identify something, Facebook blocks it. And the way we do that is we have the technology, and then we work with the music industry, and we work with Hollywood studios, and they give us their content to put in the database so it can be recognized. So that's what we do, and my show and tell is we actually won an Emmy. So you guys can pass it by.
Don't drop it, Oliver.
So it's a Technical and Engineering Achievement Emmy for our technology and its use in television.
Take a picture.
You guys can take selfies. I'll stay afterwards. You can take it afterwards. So, it's pretty heavy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. So I'm going to tell you the quick story about the Emmy. So I was what they do is there's a technical committee for the Television Arts and Science group, and what they do is they get together and decide what area they want to award, and then they'll contact the companies that are in the area, and they ask us to fill out an application to apply. This happened about a year and a half ago, and so about a year, 6 months, 9 months after, they told us we won, and that there's going to be an awards ceremony. Now, the thing with our awards ceremony is we don't get to go where all the actors and actresses go. They keep us nerds away from those guys. And so we were in Las Vegas, but it was a very big deal. And what we did was I was invited to the dinner, and you go to the dinner, and it's a big stage, and there's about 1,000 people there, and it is streamed. And what's interesting is that I didn't get that we were going to actually win an Emmy until I was off stage getting ready to go up onto the podium and do my little acceptance speech. It didn't hit me till then. And so when they finally said, Vance, you got to walk out there, it was like, oh my God, we're winning an Emmy. And I almost forgot what I was going to say. But anyway, that's what the Emmy is. So our company, that's what our company does, is we identify copyrighted works. And we do this globally last month we checked 3.5 million files. 3.5 billion files, excuse me. I got the extra zeros. I was good in math. So 3.5 billion files, but it shows how many files everybody is doing. During New Year's, we'll do 4,000 to 5,000 files a second. We'll check. Anyway, so that's what the company does. And the last thing I think you were asking me to talk about a little bit was how do you bring an idea to fruition? That's a hard thing to do. So, I think the easy part is coming up with ideas. All of us, in the everydays of our lives, have ideas about what we think could be better. And I think what's different is the desire and the commitment to follow through and do something with it. And that requires a little bit of being objective about your idea. And it also requires, then once you believe that it is a good idea, a lot of commitment and follow through to make it real. Because what you're going to run into is a bunch of people telling you why it makes no sense at all and why all these other things play that role. And so a lot of it is commitment and hard work and dedication to the idea to make it happen. And it's not rocket science, it's just work. And so I think if you can come up with an idea and try to follow through, the other key, let me make one other comment. In the Valley here, of all the companies get started, less than 10% of them last 5 years. And even less than those actually make money for anybody and become a real thing. And so if you go down this path, as I was saying, there's nothing better about it, but a little bit of it, we all have to accept failure a little bit too, because we're gonna have failures along the way. I've had basically 2 startups before this that didn't go anywhere, and you end up just powering through and enjoying the experience, just like you're doing right now. You know, in the end, you've got your own little startup. You're trying to win first place, and you may not win, but what you guys should really do is enjoy this experience of building it and doing it, because that's probably the most important thing. And that applies to our lives as well. As I have no regrets about what I've done, and it's been a fun ride, and that's why I do things, is because they're fun, not necessarily because I think I'm going to get rich or anything, because I'm not. So anyway, and so I should leave some time for questions if you've got. Yeah.
So you mentioned 2 startups prior to this.
Yes.
What mistake do you think was like the fatal flaw for either one of those startups?
There wasn't a market for one of them. The market was too small. It cost too much to kind of build the product. And this was the import-export information. It just wasn't, it didn't fill a market need, a big enough market. And sometimes you'll never know until you know, as they say in the Valley, feed the dog food and see if the dog will eat it. That's one. Second is, are there enough dogs to eat that food? Yeah. So those are the 2 things. That's why it's so hard. You know, there is a little bit of, the other thing I tell people is, starting a company is the most arrogant, egotistical thing you could ever think. Because you think that in the world of billions of people, that you can come up with a business that doesn't exist today. That's pretty arrogant thinking. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you don't think that way. You just think, hey, I got this great idea. I want to see if that makes it real. And like I said, it's very fulfilling, even if you fail. Yeah.
So with Audible Magic, you said that you've been with the company for 19 years.
Yes.
And you won the Emmy like a couple of years ago. So how long did it take for you guys to develop the product and then start marketing it to all these big companies? And also, how did you market it?
Well, so I will tell you, most startups with the first idea don't succeed. They go through different phases where they modify the idea and do the next idea, and they take the core idea, but they'll usually modify it, change the market, change the product, change something. So that's what generally happens. We've had 3 of those. And I would say where we really got successful was starting about 2 years ago. So 16 years into it. Up until then, we were a small company that our company was 15 to 20 people for 15 years. And we're now 55. We've doubled every year in the past couple of years. So sometimes the market needs to catch up to you too. With regard to marketing it, it's a little bit about the market segment you're in. The media industry, record industry, and the TV and film industry are very closed. And to some extent, it requires time for them to feel comfortable with you. Those industries are always very nervous and scared of technical companies because all these tech companies usually come in and saying, we're going to make you disintermediate you, we're going to put you out of business, we're going to change your business model. And so they're always kind of nervous about that. So some of it requires time to establish some credibility with your market. Because we don't do broad advertising. In fact, if you would talk to most people either in the social networks or in the studios, they probably wouldn't be able to know our name. There are a group that know our name and utilize us. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
So you mentioned how people would often like propose and you'd say how your idea wouldn't make sense to go to market. So
Yeah.
can you give an example of like some concerns that people have brought up about your companies?
Yeah. One, they didn't believe the technology could work. They thought the technology wouldn't be accurate enough or be able to work at scale or wouldn't be more cost effective. The other thing that actually happens more is there are too many people saying the same thing. And we had spent our technology, we had spent a lot of time on. And as we say, all along the way, there'd be 5 to 10 companies that were competitors of Congon all along. And it'd be hard to differentiate. The other thing I think that they're always nervous about is, will you be around tomorrow? And that's a hard thing. It was hard for us. We were 15 to 20 people, and I was making payroll, but I wasn't building up a cash in the bank. I was still raising money from investors. So again, those are I think we're kind of different, but those were the big ones for us. Yeah.
So you said you were with your import-export company for
Yeah.
about 5 years, but then with Audible Magic, I think the company was kind of around for about 16 years before you developed an
Yeah.
actual product.
No,
So-
we got this version of something that was successful.
Right.
Yeah.
So what made you want to kind of stick with Audible Magic for this long?
Because I still believed. One thing that happens in startups that you know is sometimes in a startup you'll find that you start having doubts yourself, and it's sort of you lose the faith. And when that happens, startups are too hard to try to stick through it. So with this one, I never lost the faith, partly because it was mine. I was a founder. But I also believed in that we could provide a good solution in the market. And so I just never lost the faith. That was it. When you find yourself losing the faith, one of the big things is you should develop your judgment, your gut. And you're going to learn a lot from that gut, and you should really think about what it says sometimes. And my gut and the old ones were saying, this is not going to go anyplace. That's why I left after 5 years. Typically, if you're going to start something or join a small company, you need to give it like 5 years to really know. And the problem there is if you do the math, if you believe that, the statistics say that only 10% of the companies make it 5 years, and that it takes 5 years to do it, that means that that in your life you probably won't get to an expected value of 1. and so that's kind of the nature of what this is. Anything else? Yeah.
So what was the inflection point for you 2 years ago that made the slope change for the company?
Facebook just exploded. So I had signed Facebook probably 8 years ago, and when they were still a closed network for colleges, and they had this kind of growth, but in the last 3 or 4 years, their growth has just exploded. They also acquired Instagram, and so their growth expanded, and they made a real commitment to our approach, using a third party. Google YouTube, by the way, was an early customer of ours too, but they decided we're going to build it ourselves, and we got kicked out. And so, but Facebook made a real policy and strategic commitment to us, and that once they did that, social video and video sharing, social networks are just everywhere. And so everybody kind of said, oh, Facebook uses you, so we'll use you. And it just became a standard. The other thing that happened 3 or 4 years ago there were some court cases that came in our favor, supporting customers that were using our service. And which means why we've spent a lot of time from a public policy, governmental. I spent a lot of time in Washington. I testified at a congressional hearing. I spent a lot of time in Europe. There's a big copyright law going on. And if I was smart, I should have probably been a lawyer rather than an engineer. Because that's what half my job is right now. Yeah.
What would you compare the differences of working in the U.S. and working overseas in Europe or other countries?
That's a very good question. So I have worked for my other startup. I spent about 3 years in Asia setting up companies. I put a company in Hong Kong and China, and I put distribution all over Asia. I think the difference is that you have to be highly sensitive to local customs and culture. And you can't think that employees and customers are the same across. So I'll tell you what happened in my last company, and just as an example was, I had set up a distribution in Hong Kong first. I had a distributor who distributed our product. I trained them, taught them, and then and they were selling for 2 years, and they were doing very well. And suddenly I heard this from one of their reps that they started selling a competitor's product and converting all of our customers to competitors, which was against our legal agreement, obviously, because they were supposed to be exclusive, but they did it anyway. And I still remember, I flew out July 4th, Independence Day, and terminated them, contacted a lawyer, set up a company, and started hiring employees in the span of a week. It was brutal, but it was a lot of revenue for our company at the time. So there are differences in expectations, differences in culture. Europe tends to be, as an example, in France, you could never fire anybody. So what happens is you just don't want to ever hire anybody because you just don't know what'll happen. So it really hurts them, but we ended up putting people in the UK, in London, because their business practices are much more similar than the US. So the problem is you have to be aware of the laws, labor law, employees, all of that internationally. And that's usually hard for any of us to do, so you end up trying to find people that can help you and that are knowledgeable. That's one of the things you'll learn if you ever want to do businesses. You network. You talk to anybody and never make an enemy of anybody, because later on you may need to hire them or you need their advice. Anyway, anything else? Yes.
This isn't a question I originally had on my brain, but
Okay.
what you just said got me really curious. Who's the most famous person in your contacts on your phone? I want to know. This isn't for my benefit.
So, not on my contact, but some of the most famous people, I don't know if all of you remember, but I ran and met Amy Winehouse. Do you remember
Oh, wow.
Amy Winehouse? She's like, this was this talk. She committed suicide, but I met Amy Winehouse. I met, in my policy things, I met Orrin Hatch, who was a Utah senator. I almost met Hillary Clinton, but I ended up meeting her staff, chief of staff instead. In Europe, I've met the president of the European Commission, And then let me think of in my contacts the most famous person I might have. It was probably the president of the Recording Industry Association. I think that was the most. I don't think I've got anybody that. I've got 6,000 contacts in my Outlook, but I don't think there's anybody that famous. Maybe. Anyway.
Okay, so more relevant question.
Okay.
So there's a lot of buzz on like CEOs in order, or not in order to be, but a key of their success would be to like waking up at 5 a.m. and
Yeah.
just an absurd schedule that is
Yeah.
extraordinary because they are extraordinary people. So what do you have to say on the truth of that like assumption?
Well,
and
good. Well, first, I'm not extraordinary. Let me get started. I think you might need an extraordinary person to build something like an Apple. You know, Steve Jobs, if you read his book, is very known to be completely obsessed with every detail, and so it was probably 100% thinking about that. I have to say I don't do that. I think a balanced life is more important, and sometimes I actually think that I go, as a CEO, maybe I'm not as good as I could be for the company because I'm not like that. On the other hand, I think that it depends on the kind of company that you want, and is it you want to build the next Apple computer, or do you want to, contribute to the world, build something that hasn't existed before, provide jobs for people? And I think if you had a CEO that is obsessed like that, I think there's an expectation that employees work like that, and I don't have that expectation. In fact, I was just at the office picking up the Emmy, and there was somebody working on it saying, go home. Because I find, me personally, I am more creative when I'm not thinking about work the whole time. So I work from 8:30 to about 5:30 in the office. I take an hour for lunch. I read the sports page. And then at night I'll check email. But I don't work on weekends if I can't help it. Some projects I will need to do that, but I don't do that. So I think a little of that is lore. And don't get me wrong, there were times during our company that I was working crazy hours. But the same as school. I used to stay up, do all-nighters at school too.
yeah.
You guys don't know about that.
What?
I'm just joking.
So I think that, I don't think it's, if you're worried that you shouldn't go into this kind of line of work because you don't want to spend 24/7 thinking about business, that's not the reason not to go into this line of work. I think, again, follow your heart and think about what you enjoy doing, where you feel really alive, and that will really guide you on your career. I just, I could never be a Ross, just a hardcore engineer. I should have realized that in college because I could code, but my coding is terrible. And but I could talk. And then along the way, the path I took, you saw, is a lot of different industries, and it was just following kind of a little bit my heart. And but if you get a good education, a solid education, the sciences, math, that will carry you. That'll teach you how to think and solve problems. That's what you need to learn. That's a skill I learned. I couldn't integrate 1/x today, but I can solve problems. And what I just found was business is even more challenging, problem solving. Anything else? Yeah.
So adding on to that question, do you think that CEOs who work those kind of crazy schedules, do you think that in the long run speeds up the progress of the company, or do you think it doesn't make a huge difference?
I hate to generalize, but here's one I'll rationalize for me. I think CEOs that are like that, mean they're not hiring good enough people to work for them. And because my philosophy at work is I want to hire really strong people, and when they're stressed out, I'm not. When I hire somebody, I tell them, my role, my view is I want you stressed, because if you're stressed, I'm not. And so, you know, I think those guys, the Musks, Steve Jobs, I think to some extent they don't trust their people. And because there is no reason, I'm sorry, there's no reason somebody should be working like that crazy, except they like it and they feel the need to have complete control. I just don't buy that that's the only way to make a startup run.
And this is a common attribute. People who work, so Musk and the Jobs of the world, they are micromanagers. They do need to know every little detail. They need to be in the decision-making process for every little detail about the company and the business.
And I kind of say, you're going to be a better person if you have a balanced, well-rounded life. And when you get very old, you're going to realize that you were glad that you had that balanced life. Because if all your work, everything was your work, then I think you're going to be sad at the end that you lost some time that you shouldn't have. And so it's also a personal preference. Some people just really get into it, and that's where they feel alive. I'm not like that, and so I think the key is figure out what you're like. What is it, and don't think there's some model of success, because I just don't think there is. Yeah.
What do you think about the stereotype that entrepreneurs don't need the formal education in order to go into a startup and be successful?
There are people that are like that have been successful. Bill Gates is one. And I think maybe one of the things that Bill had too was you could do it if you've got a team around you to make up for your weaknesses. However, ultimately as CEO, if you want to found a company or be CEO, you've got to have a good rational problem-solving method. And to me, education is the way to get there. And as broad as you can, not just the sciences, not just the math. The arts is important. The number one skill I have is, and I think I'm good at it, is writing and communicating. And I had a teacher in high school. My senior year in high school, this teacher, I hated this class. I despise this class because every class, she would, at the last 15 or 20 minutes, she'd make us write. She'd make us write this essay or thing on a question. Every single one, and I despised it. I was thinking I need to drop out of this class. But I have to tell you, that is the biggest skill. That class, carried me the rest of my career because I learned how to write. And there's a lesson there. Things that are painful or that you despise, you're probably learning a lot doing those things. So I guess my answer is, it may happen, but I think you're going to be better equipped to have a solid education and diversity of experience as well. If you can go to school overseas, I think that's a great thing. I think, volunteering is a great thing. I think all those things add to your ability to deal with business and challenges, because it's a diversity of people and diversity of problems, and nobody wants to work for a guy that's a machine. They want to work for a human being, and if they can identify with you for a wide range of things, they're gonna follow you. You're gonna be more credible. Anyway, anything else? Yeah.
Can we ask why you were going to meet with Hillary Clinton?
It was, so for us, copyright law is a very important thing. And so at the time, there was some discussions about changes to two things, copyright law, and secondly, higher education's responsibility towards enforcing copyright. So what happened at the time, which probably still is happening, is there was a lot of peer-to-peer file sharing and downloading of music and TV and film, and copyright is intellectual property, and there's value to it. And so the record industry and the movie industry were really fighting to try to enforce that the universities bore some responsibility to protect copyright on campuses, even though it's happening in the dorms. And so they later passed the Higher Education Opportunity Act and enforced that universities have to take some measures to prevent that. Otherwise, their funding would get cut off. And so that's where I got it. And that's why I was in a panel, a congressional hearing, which, by the way, is the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And then later, so it became law later on. So you don't always have to talk to the politician. Their chiefs of staffs do everything anyway. Okay? Yes? Yeah.
So as a robotics team, we have the responsibility to essentially reach out to different companies and ask for them to be our sponsor in order to fund essentially our innovation.
Yep.
And so, do you have any advice on how to go about doing that? Especially because as high schoolers, I don't necessarily think we have the connections quite yet.
Well, you may have more connections than you realize first. So anything in business, this is like a startup. Me, my little startup, I was talk to record companies and talk to studios, and most of the time they don't even return your phone call. And so it's a degree of persistence first, but when you finally get them, you really need to think through. I always say, think like a customer, think like your audience. Why would they care? And so you've got to communicate with them why they should care about this, and what's in it for them. I'm always in the what's in it for the other guy. And so the last thing is, just don't have fear. You're going to get turned down. They're not going to answer your phone call. They're not going to return your emails. This is just practice for starting a company. I went 9 months, and we finally got an inbound phone call. Somebody called us, and we were like screaming because we can't believe it must have been a wrong number we were thinking. So the second thing is, that's where this networking. I was like this. When I was in high school or college, you would feel like you needed to do it on your own. And that I can't rely on my parents to make a phone call or introduce me to somebody. I'm sure you guys all have that summer job, but you know what? That is the way business is done. That is how things happen. And so I think about your whole network, the extended network. Teachers might know somebody, and utilize that. Don't be shy about using that. Nobody in business thinks twice about it. That's how it's done. So, and just keep doing it. You're going to get knocked down so many times that, and you just got to keep going for it and think. This is a learning experience. I'll say one last thing about this. VCs, are investors in a company. I was remembering my previous startup. One of the investors, who was a board member, was telling we were going through a real tough time. There was a problem we couldn't figure out how to solve. And he said, Vance, all these problems that you face along the way, that you're trying to solve, that's how you build value in the company. Because he said those companies that suddenly go from nowhere to $100 billion, he goes, they'll go to zero just like that. because there's no real value in the company. And so all those problems you're trying to overcome, those are important things. Those are how you build value in your idea and your company. So,
Got it. Thank you so much.
anything else?
Well, let's thank.
Well, thank you for listening to me for so long. Good luck. You guys gonna show me your stuff?
Yeah, we're gonna do that for sure.